And so the other topic is that gets a lot of discussion here is driver shortage, right? And the driver market, and as well as the impact of regulations on driver productivity here in the U.S. with hours of service and the electronic logging devices and things like that. I assume that similar kind of challenges exist in the EU when it comes to the driver pool availability and the impact of regulations.
Oh, absolutely. So I think being a truck driver is not considered a very desirable job, particularly in Western Europe, for all of the restrictions that you have. Obviously, the old romantics of getting in a truck and driving through the countryside is taken away by GPS controls and all of that kind of matter. So it is difficult to find young people to go into trucks. We have abolished in many countries mandatory defense service or army service, as we had, which was a big source of driving talent, because people made their driver's license in the army and then went into the civil economy and became a truck driver. That is obviously supplemented by the EU enlargement, adding a pool of drivers that are coming in. So we have the same challenge, but obviously we still have a reservoir of opportunity coming outside. And I have to make a comment that obviously the discussion and the prediction about autonomy and autonomous vehicles do not help on the labor market, because who wants to enter the labor market in an industry where everybody says in 10 years' time or 20 years' time there won't be any jobs? I think that discussion is obviously important, but overrated in a way. It's an opportunity for our industry as well as a threat on the short run. So we have that challenge. But there is a reservoir of people to deal with. And then we come on the legislative regulatory side, and that is a real bugbear in Europe because we've got so many sovereign member states. So the European Union strives for one common market with free movement of goods and people. But at the same token, when it comes to so working hours, driver working hours have been pretty much harmonized across the EU member states. So 4 hours up, then taking a break, then another 4 hours up to maximum, etc. That is pretty much harmonized across most of the member states, and the controls are in place. So in that sense, we have made a lot of progress. But recently, there's a whole debate about minimum wage in Europe, where low-paid jobs, including those of truck drivers, have been subject to minimum wage. And those minimum wage regulations, unfortunately, are made on a sovereign membership member state level. And that is challenging for us because they're obviously different. And the amount of administration and controls in each country are very different. So that means that a Polish truck driver coming from his home base through Germany, delivering a load in France, will be subject to his home rules, in transit through the German rules, and when he ends up in France, to the French rules. And everybody calculates the minimum wage different. And we as forwarders or brokers are liable in case we employ such contract to these rules. So that causes a lot of discussion. And there was when the French law was introduced, there were actually drivers that wanted to avoid to load or unload in France. And that obviously then restricted the driver pool on that market and changed the pricing dynamics. So these are disruptions that we have to work through until that European common market comes. Another example is that many countries are now considering that drivers who are on the road for more than 1 week, which is very common in international traffic, have to spend the weekend outside of their truck. They felt that it was inhuman to have a person spending his weekend in the cabin on a truck stop. Now, funny enough, the drivers were not so bothered about it. They rather stay with their truck and have all their stuff in there than having to go into a cheap hotel somewhere else. But obviously, this is a planning nightmare. So we have drivers that don't want to load on a Friday because they don't want to be stuck in a certain country where this law applies, because they want to be out of that country so that they can stay in their truck in another country. So that is a whole planning nightmare because it's not applied across the whole of Europe. And that obviously restricts movements of goods and therefore artificially reduces the capacity. So in Europe, there is a continuous battle with that changes in legislation, a continuous lobby to make them at least harmonize across Europe. And I want to emphasize that all these laws are made without the shadow of a doubt for good and to improve the working conditions in which we should have an interest. But we cannot have an interest when they're made by single member states. And that, I have to take a big applause to our planners who work their way around that all the time, needing to consider all of these kind of things. And that makes Europe particularly special and complicated, and in a way is a justification for the dispatching capability that we as forwarders and brokers have.